What up, EJK here, bringing you the third installment of this new age mech TvT style that we're seeing innovation break out in the GSL round of 4. And here we go. So, game number 3 was on Catalina, and innovation went biotank, and he won. Great for him. But it wasn't a mech game, so not going to pay any attention to that. But we will pay attention to the rest of the games because I just finished watching them and they are all in fact mech games. Foxtrot, innovation decides to go for this 2-base mech kind of push. I could argue, and I would also agree, that the build that innovation does on Foxtrot could also just as easily have been used on Catalina. And he could have used the build on Catalina just as easily as, or just as easily on Foxtrot as well. So I think the maps are very similar, and so both builds are kind of different styles from what innovation was showing us. And so, yeah, I think it's pretty interchangeable. If you don't like Foxtrot and you veto it, then you could use this build on Catalina, vice versa. So we see here innovation going for his standard gas first build. It seems to be his go-to build opening wise. And the thing that happens in this game is that he kind of LOL. Nice signs. This game is, it kind of, I don't think innovation was planning on getting a third base on this map regardless of what happened, but he took way too much damage from a marine drop, and the key reason why he was caught off guard was because he made a Reaper this game, but that Reaper had absolutely no scouting, or it got no scouting done. It died on the ramp and only saw like 5 marines, so that could pretty much mean anything is possible, and you don't want to use a scan at this point to find out what your opponent is doing. The best option is to just play safe, and I'll point out what innovation was doing and how he did not adapt his play properly to the lack of scouting information that was available to him. We see here this is a relatively late factory. I believe it was a 13 or 15 gas. I think it was a 13 gas. 15 gas would have been too slow for that factory timing. So it's not the fastest possible build, but even if it was a very fast marine Hellion drop, innovation still would have taken a lot of damage from it simply because his units were out of position, and if he was able to rule out that this kind of an attack was not coming, then I think he would have been in a good position. But as a result of not knowing what was going on, wait a minute. Yeah, this is the. Alright, there's Foxtrot, innovation loses, so it's 2-2. Yeah, and he doesn't see anything. And then there's Foxtrot, and then there's Nimbus, innovation goes mech, and he wins there. And then we see Overgrowth, Cure wins, and then innovation wins on Deadwing. Yeah, so for some reason I don't remember Cure making that tech lab, which is kind of weird. And then he ends up making a medevac too. Very, very strange stuff. We see here, though, regardless of having that tech lab, innovation has no idea what Cure is doing. I guess that tech lab's just there so he can follow up with Banshees a lot faster than building the tech lab after the medevac. I mean, he's not really losing anything, and he's just doing a marine drop, so he's sacrificing using the Hellions as harass in order to get the faster Banshee out. Notice how he only has 7 marines and a medevac at this point. And then he's making a Viking for defensive purposes. Okay, so right here, this drop is coming out at a pretty normal timing. Like, it's a pretty standard fast marine drop, and it's designed to not really do game-ending damage like what we see here, but it's just designed to scout your opponent. And innovation here, his entire army right here of 3 Hellions is completely on the other side of the map. For whatever reason, innovation doesn't think that Cure is doing this kind of build. Like it just didn't cross his mind, and as a result, he's just caught extremely off guard from it. And instead of taking maybe 1 or 2 damage worth from this poke, he ends up losing sub like 10 workers from this attack, which is just god awful. This is like horrible because, well, Innovation's trying to do a 2 base push, and now his economy got all messed up, so this push is going to hit later with less units. And yeah, Innovation is very pissed that that happened. And for whatever reason, he had his units just completely out of position. So if his units were in the main base, then that drop would have just picked up and the attack would have done nothing. We see here Innovation, now that he is behind, he can't get everything he wants exactly. We're going to see him do some very smart cutting, like what to prioritize when you're behind an economy. He chooses to prioritize SCVs and getting his economy back up rather than actually building units. So if you, let's say, have only 150 minerals and you are about to make 2 SCVs, you should make the 2 SCVs, is what I'm trying to say. And then build the Banshee soon after, instead of building the Banshee first and then the 2 SCVs and having like a 5-second delay time between your SCV production. We see here, Innovation, he hasn't changed anything else about his build other than the fact that he is going to have a lot less units available. He's going to have his production buildings added a lot later, but the main part of the build is still intact. We see him going for Cloak Banshees, and this is on purpose. It's not a reaction to anything that Kier has done. The Cloak Banshees is simply to set him up for his 2-base push. Keep in mind that his goal, like the way he wants to win this game is he wants to have a bigger army than he should if he was playing a macro game at a certain time in the game, and throw Kier off guard and try to get Kier to take a bad engagement and then end up winning the game through engagements rather than through kind of like getting a different unit composition, like transition to Sky Terran very quickly, or taking an economic lead of some sort. No, this is all about taking very good engagements. That's the goal of this build. And that's why we see the 2 Banshees being made with Cloak. It allows Innovation to easily break tank lines and, you know, to kind of just force his opponent slowly backwards, as we'll see happen in a couple minutes. At this point, though, Innovation is very, very behind. He's still behind by about 10 workers, and Kier is taking his 3rd base uncontested. They have equal army supply, and Innovation has not invested in a 3rd base. So Innovation would have been ahead in army supply had he not taken any economic damage. We see here on the production tab only 2 SCVs and 2 siege tanks being made. So he's prioritizing siege tanks over other units, and so it's like priority goes SCVs first, then siege tanks, then Vikings, then the Hellions, because he can't afford to make all of them at the same time because of what happened earlier on. RIP. And then we see the 2 Hellions there, and we're going to see 2 siege tanks pop up really soon. There we go. So yeah, it's kind of staggered macro-based play, and that's kind of what you have to do if you don't have enough money. And that's what a lot of high-level, I'm not going to say high-level Terran players, because there's only a handful of people in the world that I've seen actually do this. Kier doesn't do this either. So I would consider his macro second tier to Flash and Innovation are really the only people that I see do this kind of macro. In other words, just cutting units for other things, and just being able to know what to spend their money on, because they just don't have enough money to spend all of it at once. We see here this little engagement coming out from Kier. He's very, very far ahead. Innovation, of course, has a pretty dominant army. It's not as scary as he would like it to be, but he does have air superiority. He does have control of the sky and most of the ground with those 2 Banshees, and 2 Banshees is a lot better than 1, just because you can, even if you lose 1 Banshee, you'll still have 1 left, and 2 Banshees also deal a lot of DPS. They're very fragile glass cannons, but they do a lot of work against siege tanks because I believe they do bonus damage against armored, and they shoot twice as well, not to mention. We see here, innovation, he doesn't have any upgrades. He only has, I believe, 3 factories and a starport. And he's also stopped SCV production. So this push needs to hit home hard. What Kira's doing here is he's occupying the high ground, and this is allowing innovation to have a much harder time at breaking up. Like, innovation just can't A-move up into this because he doesn't have Hellbat support. He needs to slowly push his way across the map, and that's what he's doing. Here, he has a nice concave so that when innovation tries to push into it, he's going to be able to flank like what he's trying to do now. But innovation's tanks were sieged up in time, and as a result, he's able to get a lot of shots off on the bio and pretty much eliminate the most of the ground army and take a pretty good advantage in this game. However, it's not over yet because as we see on the production tab, innovation's only making 2 Hellions and 2 siege tanks at a time, whereas Kier is making 2 siege tanks, 3 marauders, 4 marines, and 2 medevacs at the same time. So even though that was a good engagement, innovation doesn't have the economy behind this to really secure himself the victory at this point. He still needs to take one more good engagement like that, and then be able to like have enough of an army at home to stop Kier's reinforcement point from overwhelming innovation. We see here the slow push going on with that Banshee, and this Banshee, as you see, is just worth its weight in gold. It's just forcing that siege tank line back, and there's nothing Kier can do about it because of how many Vikings are out on the map, and that Raven as well. That Raven can be very useful in putting down a PDD against possible Vikings, so there's really no way that Kier can contest this air superiority, and as a result, he's just losing siege tanks left and right. But because he's making 2 siege tanks at a time, and he's also making a bunch of bio units, he can afford to lose these units because they're buying enough time so that he gets an overwhelming force and is able to just kind of push innovation as soon as he unsieges and gets out of position in a little bit, because the pressure is on innovation to actually get something going in the game. As we see here, as soon as he scans, and as soon as he sees innovation siege tanks moving a little bit forward, he runs in with all of his SCVs. He has that Thor to deal with the Banshee, and he's able to just kind of take a decisive victory because he has an upgrade lead, he has an army lead, his production's better, and it's all from that early game because innovation read his opponent wrong and took way too much damage from that medevac drop. Alright, so next video will be game number 5 on Nimbus, and we're going to take a look at kind of the evolution of this style of play and how Kier is starting to combat it. Stay tuned for the next video coming out later this week. Law.